if you think of every other device that they've come out with in the past, they've come up with a new way for humans to interact with it. And they've defined how that interaction happens and they become really successful in doing it. And they're not doing it here.
It's interesting because it would seem like maybe the reason that they haven't done what you were talking about is because they're sitting back and they're looking at AI and they're going, it's not all it's cracked up to be.
Welcome to the AI Argument.
Hello, good evening, and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the AI Argument with myself, Justin Connery, joined as ever by the politically correct and ever watchful Frank Prendergast. Frank, good evening. I spent the last week traveling, by the way, and I met some of our esteemed listeners, who I can't mention by name because they're too esteemed. So we'd say hello to all of those people. Great to have you with us.
That's awesome.
And they wanted to come on our show, so we might have to have some people on the show at some point. We'll see, and maybe we could see if we could convince them one way or the other as to who's right. We could get, because the last time we got somebody to say if we were right or wrong, it was an AI, and it hallucinated and said that you were correct and I was wrong.
I'm over on TikTok convincing on our TikTok account. I'm over there convincing everyone that I'm right and you're wrong.
Great. So listen, it's been another huge week in AI. There's never a quiet week these weeks. But I think the biggest news this week has to be the news that Apple has died as a company. Its soul died a number of years ago, and WWDC or whatever it's called, which I don't think anybody saw. I'd say Nickelodeon at 11 o'clock on a bank holiday Tuesday has more viewers than WWDC. I'd say if they got into triple figures, I would be surprised.
You're making it sound like a wrestling event there with your WWDC. I think it's just the one W, Worldwide Developer Conference, I think.
Yeah, there we go. WW, Worldwide, WWDC. So look, Apple, it's such a sad story, right? So Apple came out, is it a year ago? And they had Apple Intelligence, AI. They thought that was so clever. And they've done nothing since. They have terrible AI on their products. Their AI on their pictures doesn't work terribly well. Their Siri was released years ago and hasn't got better since. If anything, it's regressed. And I think for this entire discussion, you could switch Apple for Frank, for EU, and you would have exactly the same argument, right? Which is you're all making the same mistake, which is that you're all so afraid of AI that you're not releasing any products. And I think that's the big problem. It's really sad to see a venerable company like AI, a company that, invented, or defined the personal computer age, a company that defined the smartphone age, a company that was founded on the interaction of humans and computers. And now they cannot release a product to save their life. What do you think's going on?
Right. Okay. So you heard it here first, folks. Apple is dead. Okay.
I'm not one for going over the top.
Unsurprisingly, I'm definitely going to push back on this one because, as you said, there's a definite. I can see why you say that there is a correlation here between Apple and Frank and the EU. Mm-hmm. Okay. First of all, let me say, WWDC. I did not watch the whole thing, nor after watching the summarized highlights did I have any interest in watching the whole thing.
Yep.
We've seen some events recently. I mean, Google did an amazing event recently, and the highlights, it was like everything was just like wow after wow after wow, and it was like, wow, Google have finally arrived. The Google who were so far ahead in AI, who then fell completely behind, are now kind of back at the races, and it was really wow. WWDC had nothing like that. I mean, I couldn't believe that I was watching a highlights reel and they were telling me things like, you can change your folder colors.
It was unbelievable. Or you could get two emojis and you can stick them together. And look at this. We now have liquid glass. It's a new way, which apparently all the, imagine that you're going mad about this, all the people who are, what do you call it? They need high contrast screens to be able to see them properly. I'm heading that way rapidly myself. Liquid glass apparently doesn't work with high contrast. Ooh. So, and they released, Frank, not only that, right, but to try and cover up their complete lack of leadership and total ignoring of the technical space and the way society is going, they released a paper a couple of days beforehand called The Illusion of Intelligence. Go on, yeah.
Before we get to the paper, which will be even more fun,
Yes.
I want to push back though, because I agree WWDC didn't wow anybody, didn't impress anybody, and certainly for AI enthusiasts, it was very meh. Even though, you know, a lot of it was AI based, but it was nothing particularly impressive, apart from the people who are very pro privacy and are applauding Apple for their on-device AI methodologies that mean that users' data is kept private. Other than that, I think no one had anything particularly positive to say about it. However, where I would push back is this. Apple traditionally, you know, their whole thing is they do a device and they do it super well. And
Yes.
they have always merged like form and function so well. Like they are beautiful devices, but they do exactly what they're meant to really, really well. And AI doesn't necessarily fit that bill. And so I think you're right. They are being cautious, but I will be very curious to see in the long run whether that caution plays out. Now, does that mean that they had to have a horrendous WDC and they couldn't come up with anything to wow people? No, absolutely not. You know, there's no excuse for a meh event. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that in the long run, I wonder will their caution actually benefit them, given the company that they are and given the reputation that they have. I think putting a load of AI features that screw up and make the headlines for all the wrong reasons would be the worst thing they could do.
Now, you see, the thing about Apple, right? The thing that Apple used to do really well was they would take a core product, a core idea, like they would have a principle, a design principle, and then they would design a line of products around that design principle. So if you can imagine, right, when the iPhone came out, it wasn't actually a surprise because they had an iPod, which was exactly the same as the iPhone, but just didn't have the phone bit stuck into it. The first iPod was released in 2001. 2001. I just checked it. and and then, you know, it was 2007 for the iPhone, and what was it, 2009 for the iPad, right? So they had just basically, they had a design language and a way of interacting that was just clearly brilliant. But it wasn't a surprise. It didn't come out of nowhere. They were releasing products all the time and honing the products and making them better. There's a famous story, actually, about Steve Jobs. It's told about the iPhone, but I'm guessing it was about the iPod, which was when he got the first one from his engineers. Right, it was a bit big and it was a bit bulky, and he dropped it into a goldfish bowl, thing full of water, and there was bubbles came out, and he said, "You see the bubbles? You're wasting space. Get rid of the bubbles." And that was it, right? Because he wanted it to be small and beautiful and everything. But the point is, right, that they obsess about how humans interact with the device, right? And so Steve Jobs obsessed about the single button right at the bottom of the iPhone. He obsessed about the icons, you know, the couple of apps that were on the front page, right? And he got that really well. But it didn't happen overnight, right? It was product was released iterative after iterative, getting better and better and better. What have they released today? Nothing. There's no vision. There's no clear path where you can say, that's fine, give them another 2 or 3 years. They're clearly working towards something. If you were to look at them in 2004, dispassionately, right, you would have seen the iPod and you would have said, yes, I don't know how they're going to do it technically, but there's clearly a path to where they're going. There's no path. There's no vision. They're totally bereft of, you know, putting the center. At some point in the last couple of years, Apple changed from being a company which was pushing the frontier of technology and instead became a company which is just protecting its patch and is just trying to consolidate what it has as opposed to trying to push stuff out further.
That's interesting in terms of like in terms of putting current AI into the devices that we're familiar with. I think they may well be doing the right thing by being cautious, but in terms of coming out with something that wows us all, in terms of a completely you're basically saying, why haven't they come out with the completely unique device that utilizes AI in a way that nobody has conceived so far?
Yes. Sorry. Thank you for putting words in my mouth. That's exactly what I'm saying. Right. So if you think of every other device that they've come out with in the past, they've come up with a new way for humans to interact with it. And they've defined how that interaction happens, and they've become really successful in doing it. And they're not doing it here, you know, and there's no idea. There's no, so Johnny Ive, who was their great designer from 10 or 15 years ago, is now with OpenAI, and he's going to come up with the great device that defines how we interact with AI. You have
Hmm.
Meta, who again have fired most of their AI team in the last couple of weeks. They've bought Scale AI for $15 billion, and that's not for their products, that's for their people, right? To bring their people in. He's going to have them sitting right beside them, and they're going to define how they believe that people should interact with AI. But Apple have done nothing. What are they doing? And that's why I'm saying
Well,
Apple
this.
is dead. Like, they are one device away from becoming Nokia. They're one
Hmm.
device away from, as soon as somebody comes out with a device which is clearly better than an iPhone and has AI built in, Apple are gone like that.
Well, this does provide a kind of an interesting segue into the paper that you were bringing up a minute ago, because they brought out this paper that basically says reasoning models are not capable of reasoning.
Hmm.
Um, and so, it's interesting because it would seem like maybe the reason that they haven't done what you were talking about is because they're sitting back and they're looking at AI and they're going, it's not all it's cracked up to be. For all we know, they're working very hard somewhere on a device and they're going, yeah, the current LLMs are not even the reasoning models. They're just not at the point where we can come up with an amazing device that wows people and goes beyond their expectations. But so tell me a bit about what you thought about this paper that basically says reasoning models are not capable of reasoning.
So I didn't realize that Gary Marcus had become the head of research and development at Apple Inc., but it seems like that's actually what's happened now. So the paper was totally rubbish, right? So the paper they put out says, yeah, reasoning models don't actually reason, and as soon as they go beyond certain things, their reasoning capabilities fall off a cliff, right? But what they didn't do was they didn't give the reasoning models the ability to use the tools that a reasoning model would normally use in order to solve a puzzle. And they also purposely gave the reasoning models puzzles which were bigger than the context window. So the reasoning model would correctly start to reason through the problem,
Mm-hmm.
and then it would run out of context window. So they just dynamically moved to the context window. So the reasoning model didn't know what had happened back at the start of the puzzle, and quite logically, its performance would fall off a cliff. But
Mm-hmm.
normally, what the reasoning model would do, for instance, for the types of problems, they had the Tower of Babel and they had a couple of other Tower of Babels when you move things around. And normally, what a reasoning model would do in that instance is would just write a computer program to solve it. And in fact, if you left it do that, it would solve the reasoning problem perfectly. You can demonstrate that it does reason and it finds a way to solve the problem and solves it. They held they tied the arms behind the back. The design constraints around how they did the paper were totally wrong. And it seems like it's coming from a place of them trying to justify their lack of a reasoning model, as opposed to coming from a place where somebody is trying to be innovative in order to create a way for humans to use this cool new technology. And Apple used to be a company that used to find innovative ways for people to use cool new technology. Apple were the company that designed mice. When the whole planet was designing mice with 2 buttons on them, Apple said, no, we will only have 1 button and we will design a user interface for that to work. And they did, and it was beautiful, right? And it was quirky. Apple were a bit like the French of the technological age, right? They were a bit quirky, they were a bit weird, they were a bit niche, but they were always beautiful and incredible. And a bit like the French and the EU, Apple have also decided that it's easier to protect what they have rather than to innovate again in this new age that we're in.
Yeah, yeah. The paper was. I have to admit that paper was odd, for sure. No, I didn't. I did not read the paper. My analysis of the paper, I have to admit, comes through both from Matthew Berman and Wes Roth, who
Yeah.
are both AI YouTubers that are well worth following if people aren't already. And I did think it was kind of interesting. Like they were pointing out stuff as if it was revelatory that I thought we already knew, such as non-reasoning models were able to. So they had like three. They developed these puzzles to give the reasoning models, and they
Yep.
had like easy, medium, and difficult versions of these puzzles. And on the easy versions of the puzzles, non-thinking models could also basically both reasoning and non-reasoning models could solve the puzzles if they were easy. Then they started to struggle if they were medium, and then they gave up for hard. But what they were saying was interesting was the non-reasoning models solved them as well as the reasoning models if you used the same amount of tokens. So in other words, if you prompted the non-reasoning model enough, it could also get to the same answer. And they were saying this as if it was revelatory, but I was kind of like, hang on, I thought we knew this already.
We did, and there's been loads of papers published to say that, actually. If you just say, keep going, you'll actually get a better answer. Correct.
Yeah. And the benefit of the reasoning model is just that you don't have to worry about the prompts that keep it going and keep it going. So I did find it very odd that they seem to be kind of like, hey, big revelation. And we're like, no, didn't we know that already? So yeah, a very, very odd paper in a lot of regards. However, I think interesting I agree with your points, absolutely 100%. But also an interesting paper to put out there in terms of if they published that paper, if they thought that paper was worth publishing, I think it's potentially because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what these models do. And I think that it's reasonably fair, probably, to say that they don't actually reason. It gets a little bit murky because, do we really know what reasoning is? Can we really define, say, human reasoning versus AI reasoning? But I think it's probably fair to say they don't reason in the way that we think of a human reasoning. The question is, does it matter if it can get to the same outcomes? And I think that's where the paper falls down, is that the models are doing incredible things. Does it really matter if it's not reasoning in inverted commas?
No, it doesn't. And the internet, my Twitter feed was raging this week because Ilya Stutzker was seen for the first time in years, which is very exciting. And he was at some ceremony, passing through graduation ceremony type thing. And he was saying that he said that the human brain is basically a biological computer. And of course, AGI, it's absolutely guaranteed that AGI is going to happen. It's absolutely guaranteed that ASI is going to happen. And the reason is because the substrate is going to change. It's a silicon computer as opposed to a biological computer. But other than that, they are identical in almost every way. And he was saying, therefore, that's the argument for these things absolutely guaranteed to happen. And the internet went wild, giving out about poor old Ilya, saying that the human brain and the silicon brain do not at all equate to each other. They're totally different. And it's like potato, potato. If the output is the same, what does it matter? And you get into very philosophical questions because if you're to, actually, I'll ask you, do you accept then that it doesn't matter? So if the output is the same, does it matter if it's thinking or reasoning the same way as a human or not? Or is it inconsequential?
I think it matters. I don't think Apple's paper proved what they wanted it to prove, but I think that it deserves more investigation, because if the output is only the same when the information can be verified because it already exists, that's very different to the whole concept of novel insight. And when the models can reason to the point that they can give us novel insights, then I think we have to accept that it doesn't matter whether it doesn't matter what the methodology is.
Okay, and the whole novel insights thing to me is actually a non-argument anyway, because it's been 5 or 6 years since we had AlphaGo, and it did move 37, which was a novel insight in a game of Go, which nobody had ever done before. And so if you accept that happened, and happened a long time ago now, right? Of course, they're going to come up with novel insights by the same,
Well, yes. So yes, I agree with you. As in, Google have been doing a lot of work even since then. We've talked on the show about some of the data center efficiencies that their Alpha Evolve came up with, and so there is really interesting stuff happening in that field, but not with, say, O3 Pro, the reasoning, or O3 even, a reasoning model. So I'm talking specifically about the consumer models that we have access to.
Yes,
Google may have very, very, very specifically designed AI that can produce novel insights in a very, very specific scientific vertical. But here we're talking about the reasoning models. So that's the distinction I would make.
Okay. So anyway, to move back to my question, right? If the model, if it reasons, right, but the reasoning, the way that it reasons is different to you, right? So you're given a problem, it's given a problem. You both reason in different ways. You're not a biological computer, you're something special. The computer just reasons in its computer way, but you get to the same answer at the end. Does it therefore matter if it reasons or not? The fact is you both got to the same right answer.
But my answer remains the same, that like it does matter it does matter if the model can't produce novel insights, then we shouldn't necessarily think of it as reasoning. So I mean,
but let's say you both come to the same novel insight.
Then it doesn't matter. Then I agree with you, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Then
Brilliant.
it's just a different form of reasoning, and I'm cool with calling it reasoning because of that.
Okay, and then that same model, right? Because I think we're basically there, right? I couldn't give you an example of a novel reason, but there was. Okay, so I will actually. Sorry, there was a scientific paper published about 2 weeks ago where they trained the model up until, let's say, I think it was 18 months ago, and then they gave it the problems from 18 months ago to solve. And it was the mathematical problems. Remember that? And it's I think for 70% of them or 75% of them, it came up with exactly the same mathematical solution. This was a Google paper. It came up with exactly the same solution as the humans had come up with in the intervening the time afterwards, right? And then for, I don't know, was it 15%? It came up with a slightly better solution. It was the one to do with the 13 dimensions and whatever. Was that you can touch balls off each other closely in 13 dimensions in a way that we hadn't discovered before. That was a novel insight, right? Anyway, this is a long-winded way of getting you to admit that if you admit that the model, if it comes up with a novel insight, which a human has, which has been scientifically proven by Google, if that same model then turns around and says it's conscious, is it conscious?
Oh.
Oh.
I'm not going to touch that one with a barge pole right now, because
by your logic, it's conscious.
Well, no, I'm not going to go there. I certainly think it opens up a whole can of worms that need to be addressed. But we do have a couple of other topics that we want to get to today, and we would never get there if we opened this particular can of worms. So you mentioned a minute ago that
I'll take that as a win.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. I always have trouble pronouncing his name. You mentioned Ilya Sutskever?
Yes.
Sutskever, I think
Indeed,
it is.
Sutskever.
I never know where the T goes. Talking about, AI, AGI as a certainty. And someone else who was talking about AGI as a certainty this week was Sam Altman.
And the curse of self-improvement.
Yeah, well, he covered, there was a lot he covered in that blog post. If I was to try and summarize it, basically it opens basically saying we've passed the event horizon. So he's basically saying super intelligence is happening, it's underway, it's basically not a maybe.
Great news.
He goes on sorry, say again.
Great news, delighted to hear it.
Yeah, well, let's see what else he has to say before we start celebrating.
Can we just quote him, actually, because it was brilliant. We are past the event horizon, the takeoff has started. Woohoo, let's go.
Is he not totally mixing his metaphors there, Justin? How could the takeoff be happening if we're past the event horizon?
It's that attention to detail, Frank, that I'm impressed with. I don't know who let this out.
So he goes on to kind of say, look, I think what was the post called? It was like the gentle
singularity.
The gentle singularity.
It's like a little lullaby.
The idea behind it being that, look, humans adapt, and he even makes the point that we're adapting quickly already in terms of like the amazing things that AI can do now. They're kind of like table stakes, and everyone is like, oh yeah, AI can write a beautiful paragraph, but it can't write a novel.
He's not wrong.
And he says, look, the cost of intelligence is going to drop, and that's going to drive progress. And he says scientific progress is the biggest driver of overall progress, which then leads him into exactly what you mentioned a minute ago, that scientific progress is going to result in recursive self-improvement. And he kind of goes so far as to say, as it's already starting. He talks about it being kind of in a larval state, but and we talked about it just a second ago with Google's Alpha Evolve, finding ways to improve AI algorithms, etc. So he's referring to those kind of innovations as being a larval version of recursive self-improvement. So he then goes on to talk about, recursive self-improvement, and he talks about, building a certain amount of robots and then essentially never having to build another robot because they just build themselves. And he says even data centers will just self-replicate. I don't know what he meant by that. I can't quite visualize data centers self-replicating, but it's a fascinating concept.
Yep.
Then, he talks about all this change, and then he says, look, everything's going to change, but it won't be as traumatic as some people are fearing.
I'm comforted by that. I feel better.
I'm glad you're comforted, because I was reading it going, okay, where's the detail here, Sam? Where's, because he does, it's not that he's not just saying everything's going to be rosy, everything's going to be amazing. He's painting a very positive picture. He is admitting that there's going to be issues. There are going to be certain classes of jobs that are going to be destroyed, but he says that other jobs will be created. I actually thought this was interesting. I was trying to tease it apart. Like, he seems to be saying a couple of things. He seems to be saying new jobs will be created. He also seems to be saying the world will be so much more richer and affluent that we will be able to support people who don't have jobs. Like, he doesn't state that specifically, but that seems to be the inference. And he also talks about how, humans have a connection to each other, and we will always have that connection to each other. And he seems to be equating that then with something very similar to what you said an episode or two ago, where he's talking about if you spoke to a farmer from a couple of 100 years ago, they would look at the jobs that we do now and they'd be like, they're not jobs. That's not work. What are you guys doing? You're just pretending. And he's kind of saying that we will look back, if we could see those jobs now, if we could see the jobs of the future now, we would probably think they're insane and they make no sense, etc. But that as humans, and because of this human connection and because of the way we operate, we will invest meaning in whatever those crazy things that we're doing in the future are.
And that's true.
Which I thought was...
That's totally true, right? I mean, you could take the happiest person in the world, right? And they have everything they ever wished for, but, their car has a flat tire. And that flat tire will be the most important thing in the world to that person, right? To everybody else, look at going, your life is perfect. All you got wrong is a flat tire. But, that's people invest meaning in whatever it is they're doing. He's totally correct. What's your problem with this?
So my problem is that, right at the end, then he mentions some of the problems. I mean, for example, he says, society will need new social contracts, and he talks about that happening gradually, that it won't be a case that we all go, that somebody goes, oh, this is how we fix it. He says it'll happen gradually. But, he totally glosses over how difficult that is, and how historically difficult wealth, equitable wealth distribution has been. And then at the very end of the post, he just lobs two major grenades in there with very little kind of detail, which are, he kind of says, look, there are some issues to be addressed. And he says, we have to sort out the alignment issue. In other words, we have to make sure that AI operates in humanity's interest. And secondly, we need to ensure that there is equitable access to the superintelligence that we are developing. So two major grenades there in terms of like things that we have not solved, things that we have no idea how we're going to solve, and that we have to solve in order to get to any kind of positive future here with AI.
He's the leader of a tech company. He's not a politician, so he can't rewrite the social contract. All he could do is point out and listen, right? Who have we heard talking about this in the last couple of weeks? We've got Sam Altman has said we need to rewrite. Demis Habbibus has said it's going to be a world of abundance. Dario Modi has said there's going to be huge unemployment in the next couple of years. We need to sort something out. But none of them have come out with a solution because it's not their job to come up with a solution. They're just creating the technology. And they're telling us, of course, they're going to tell us the upside. And it's up to other people to come up with the solutions on the downside.
And I think this is exactly why we need regulation, because it goes back. It goes back to who was it? I can't remember. Can't remember the name. You might remember when I tell you the quote. The guy who basically said, "Look, can you imagine a pharmaceutical company saying, yeah, we're launching this drug next year. We think it's probably going to be amazing. It's probably going to make everyone's life better. But yeah, it's up to you guys to make sure it actually doesn't kill everybody."
I don't remember the quote, right? But actually, the reality is the exact opposite of that, right? So what we're saying is it's a pharmaceutical company that's releasing a drug that says, we're going to give you a drug next year. It's going to make everybody's life better. It's going to make you all richer. It's going to make you all better looking, and it's going to make you all happier as well. There may be some downside. We're not really sure. We're not going to know about it for a long time. But do you want to have a good life now or not? And I think most people will take the good life.
And there's the techno optimist view right there. So
go on.
No, I was just going to say, we've covered some heavy stuff today, and I got to say, I struggled there for a while to find any kind of a fun, upbeat AI story to close out on. But
I've got great news to you. I've got great news for you, Frank. Before you get into your funny story, and I'll let you close out in your funny story. But I've got great news. I've got great news for you.
Yeah.
So that I had a short-lived but passionate dalliance with JD Vance.
How could I forget?
So me and JD, we had a short dalliance around Valentine's Day when he came to Europe and basically kicked Europe up the ass and said, look, you need to stop with your regulation and get on. And I thought that was great. Turns out, so this week they're bringing Donald Trump's big beautiful bill through the houses of whatever they have over there in America, and they're bringing it through. And in it, there is a provision to say that no state will be allowed to create its own laws in relation to AI for the next 10 years. So, what's going on here, you would say? So JD Vance was being interviewed during the week, and it turns out that he says actually he thinks that provision will not go through. He thinks it's going to be dropped, which I think is great news. Well, I think you should think it's great news. And the reason is for copyright reasons. That's why he wants to stop it. He was talking to the representatives from the great states of Tennessee and Georgia, if I'm correct, and they were worried that AI was going to destroy music. And we're talking about both types of music, country and Western. And he was swayed by this argument, and he said the reason that was in there was he didn't want those damned liberals in California putting in laws which is going to drive our AI, into sort of silly places. So instead, that's why they were going to stop the states from making laws. But now, because he talked to the country and Western musicians from Tennessee and I think it was Georgia, he decided actually we're going to take that provision out, which is great news for you.
That is absolutely fascinating. I hadn't heard that at all, and I don't understand it. That's amazing.
Do you love JD Vance a little bit more now?
Well, I'm very interested. I definitely want to look into this more, and I'm really curious. For example, why, with his views, is it because? Like, why doesn't he stick? Why don't they stick to their guns, but then regulate for it at the federal level? Like, I'm not against allowing the states to regulate AI for themselves. I don't really understand, the American political landscape and what things are usually done at a federal level and what things are usually done at a state level. I can't claim to understand any of that, but I am absolutely fascinated by the fact that JD Vance now is thinking about taking that out of that bill on that basis. That is fascinating, and I do not understand.
There you go, but love him a little bit more as a result.
I will not go that far.
I'll take that as a win too. Go on, what's your funny story for the week?
So, do you remember Katie Price?
I loved Katie Price.
Did you? So, Katie Price, I don't know I don't know what you'd call her. I know she was a model. She's a celebrity.
Glamour model. She was a glamour model.
She was a glamour model. Is she still? I don't know what you'd call her now, but she's been on like the reality shows and. Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay. She sings. I know her. Yeah, she was doing some concert there the other week.
She was known as Jordan.
She's doing a tour, Frank.
I had no idea.
I'm a big fan of Katie Price.
I was never as big a fan of Katie Price as you were, clearly.
Yeah, love JD Price.
But I do remember her, and I do remember Jordan. And so Jordan was what she called herself when she was modeling 20 years ago or something, even longer. And she has signed a 6-figure deal with a UK AI company to bring back Jordan in AI form. So Jordan is coming back, They
Yeah.
will have the rights apparently for Jordan to do anything from like TV to I think the quote.
Anything?
Well, I think the quote I saw was anything from TV to OnlyFans.
No.
But this was I think just a commentator pointing out that like they could do anything with this AI avatar.
Anything?
And Katie Price herself wouldn't have to lift a finger. Her AI
Wow.
alter ego, her younger self, Jordan, will be out there doing her own thing. Kind of fascinating. Apparently she's not the first. There is an American celebrity who's signed a similar deal, and I've completely forgotten who they said that was.
Well, there's those those people that do the masterclass. They've done a similar thing with masterclass, but obviously you can't do the things that we all want to do with Katie Price and masterclass to Gordon. Oh, maybe we can. Actually, they're doing it with Gordon Ramsay, so maybe you can shout back at Gordon Ramsay and tell him he's a stupid sandwich as you jam 2 bits of bread either side of your monitor. And a couple of other people. But that's fantastic news. I'm delighted. That's made my whole weekend.
I mean, way of the future for celebrities, I would assume.
Brilliant. All right. Well, Frank, that's me sorted. Have a great week. I know what I'll be doing for the rest of the week.
Have a great week with Jordan, Justin. Chat to you next week.
Take it easy.